people always come up with, even if they make them up, issues to justify their position or what they do. And we learned that at a very young age. So my oldest daughter, Blair, back when she was 2, she figured out she could get away with just about anything by saying, "But Daddy, I'm scared." I'm like, "Oh, baby, don't be scared. Daddy's here and he'll take care of all of it for you." And she got away with that for 6 months until finally she said it about wearing pants. And I was like, dang, I just got mediated.
Welcome to the show, Jim. It's great to have you.
Man, thanks for having me.
I know Johnny and I are really curious, what was the impetus for the book and how did you get started really thinking critically about conflict?
So I'm a little crazy, a little weird. I get told I'm a mixture of Ted Lasso and Chris Traeger from Parks and Rec. And my passion in life is conflict resolution. So got into it doing mediations. So wild family divorce mediations, as well as corporate. Kind of going around and dealing with conflict on the back end once it had escalated and once things went wild, and wanted to really kind of get focused on the front end, how to help people resolve conflict before they have to come see me in mediation.
Well, I know Johnny and I have gone through mediation and not a fan necessarily of the result, but certainly understand the process. But for those in our audience who aren't super familiar with mediation, can you break down just a general walkthrough of what that looks like?
Mediation, I always tell people it's if they're bringing you in to mediate it, then they can't resolve the conflict themselves, or they don't want to. So on the family side of things, this is maybe escalated to the point of a divorce or some issues, with breaking up wills and things in the family. But you're headed to court. And mediation is kind of that last stop. In the corporate sense, it's when, whether it's with an organization or it's separate, it's once that is completely bridges are burnt. So my job is to help make an amicable split, or maybe potentially build those bridges back.
I know for us going through the experience, obviously emotions are definitely high. You have results that you're looking to get, and you've tried numerous ways to resolve it peacefully, amicably, as you state. And what we found interesting is, we were basically in a room with the mediator bouncing between the two parties to alleviate a lot of the emotional stress to try to get to resolve the deeper issues that are leading to the impasse. So is that the typical experience of a mediation, and you bouncing between rooms in those scenarios?
That is, if things are going well, it may have to spend a little more time in some rooms versus others. But typically, it's taking things people are saying and what their issues are, reframing those and presenting it to the other side, since they're not able to talk amongst themselves without fighting, or in some cases, literally fighting.
Oh yeah, we definitely understood the emotions were high. So as we start to unpack conflict, what's going on behind the scenes? I know for many of us, when we're experiencing conflict, we can only really feel the emotions, and then it becomes very difficult to get to the reasoning.
The biggest thing is emotion and reason don't play well in the brain at the same time. And so typically when people are in conflict, that emotion spiked, and they're not going to be thinking rational. And so most of the time we spend so much time trying to, as you said, in that mediation stage, lower that emotion to get people thinking rationally. But a lot of times what it leads to is people are trying to fix things and solve issues that aren't really at its core what the conflict's about.
And you write in the book that difficult people are not so difficult once you understand their conflict styles. So what are the biggest misconceptions that people have around conflict, and what are these styles that we should be aware of?
I think the biggest kind of disclaimer is, so many people, myself included, when they're in conflict, they want to jump to use a set specific style or a set specific technique. And 99 times out of 100, that's going to backfire if you're using it with another style. And so really the goal in the book, and the goal with kind of our trainings and methodology, is you got to assess what somebody's style is first, because there's very specific practical techniques that are going to work with some styles versus others. And so kind of the biggest message is, hey, slow down, figure out what style that person is before we jump in trying to fix conflict.
Jim, what are some of the indicators that lead you to understand some of these different conflict resolution styles?
One of the biggest indicators is how people communicate and how they like to be communicated with. So, for example, the avoider profile, which is one of our core five styles. People think naturally that that's because they avoid conflict because they're scared of it, because they're afraid of it. That's kind of that misconception. It's not. It's really that they truly don't want to be bothered unless they feel like it's a conflict that they really have to deal with. So, for example, once they're what we call triggered, and once that emotion has risen, they do want to resolve a conflict right away. And so they do not appreciate small talk. They don't appreciate chit chat. When they're in the midst of a conflict and they've got to the point where they are sitting down, they want to be dealt with quickly and directly versus some of the other styles. It's the opposite. If you come in and you want to get down to the heart of the matter and you want to resolve that conflict, it's going to backfire on you.
And looking at those communication patterns, are you just referencing when we're actually in conflict, or can you pick up on these styles before the conflict actually happens?
Definitely pick up on it before, and that's really one of our biggest messages is identify what styles people are, and that way you can actually predict and prevent conflict before it even begins. So when it comes to how you communicate with certain people or placing them in certain situations, that you can start to see and read the tea leaves of, oh man, me and AJ are gonna we're gonna have a conflict about this situation if I structure it this way.
So let's walk through those styles then, avoider being one of them, just so we can start to identify, maybe even self-identify for audience members, what style they have.
The big five, the first being avoider, and as we said, that's not named the avoider because they're scared of conflict. They're afraid of it. These are people that weigh everything as an opportunity cost when it comes to conflict. And so they're not going to be involved in what they deem to be petty or small, insignificant conflicts or drama. They're going to wait. One of the negative components of this is that they may let conflict fester until it becomes an actual dispute and kind of raises up on that. But one of their benefits is they don't get burned out. They're not going to take small conflicts and make them big. And one of the biggest defining characteristics of them, like we said, is once they are triggered, once they actually are in a conflict, they need to be dealt with a very specific way. We need to get to the heart of the matter. I know we'll probably talk about this a little bit later, but utilizing what we call the domino technique with them on this. The second style that most people associate with conflict is the competitor. That is someone who, if they have an issue with you, you're going to know it. They're going to tell you. They're going to tell you right away. This is my problem with you. This is what I think we should do about it, and let's resolve this right now. So I know everybody has somebody in their family or in their life that is a competitor, and if you can't think of one, then it's we tell people it's probably you that are the competitor. So amazing. Sometimes competitors can get a bad rap as being intense or coming across as making conflicts grow, but honestly, amazing style when it comes to resolving conflict is with certain groups and certain people and certain conflicts. You don't want to mess around. You need to be blunt, direct, to the point, and nail down on a specific issue. The next one is the analyzer. That is someone who will not be rushed. That is someone who is going to gather all of the information. They're going to talk to as many people as they can, and they're going to figure out, okay, I think we should do this. And once they decide that, it is final. Very hard to change an analyzer's mind in conflict. And it is going to completely backfire if you rush them. So tell people you can always, if you're thinking back to family vacations and family reunions, you can always identify this is the person that they're going to plan the trip. They're going to get everything all the way together, and then their word is final. So that is, they're not going to take opinions. They're not going to take questions. It is, we're going here and we're going to have fun. So the next style is the collaborator, which is, I can self-identify as that for me. That is someone who is going to, every conflict, they're going to want to talk about it. They're going to be engaging. They're going to gather all the information similar to an analyzer, but then they're going to want to talk through it, and they're going to want to try and try and fix it. So unfortunately, I mean, I used to have just beautiful blonde flowing Thor hair, and it was awesome. I didn't have the body of Thor, but I had the hair. And being a collaborator for my whole life, it makes the hair go away. So it can definitely cause some burnout. It also can really, when we talk about best teammates and worst teammates, it can rub certain profiles wrong because they're always engaging, always wanting to talk, not wanting everybody to get along. But that can kind of get them in some trouble. And then the final profile is the accommodator. So that is someone who would so much rather just fix it themselves, do it themselves. They're not going to confront people. So they are going to, similar to an avoider, they're going to avoid conflict, but for completely different reasons. They do not want to have that direct confrontation. They're going to want to talk to everybody else except for the person that they're actually in conflict with, which can be very beneficial. There's certainly some situations where accommodating needs to happen, but it can also get them in trouble a little bit, or if you have people on your team that are like this, because they'll act like nothing's wrong, they'll say nothing's wrong, and it'll build and build and build and build and build until they reach that fight or flight moment to where it's the issues have stacked up and they either blow up about an issue number 17 when it's not about issue number 17, or they're going to quit, leave, and you have no idea why and what you did to offend them. So each of the styles, and that's kind of the biggest message, is there's no right or wrong style. There's no magic style. But identifying what people are allows us to use different techniques with each.
Now, Jim, this is great to be able to pinpoint these different styles. And certainly, if everyone is a rational actor who wants to get to a resolution, well, then according to those styles, everyone should be able to work towards those resolutions. What are some of the signs or styles of recognizing that perhaps we're not dealing with rational actors?
That's a great point, because like I said, once conflict is escalated, you're not dealing with very many rational people, just in general. So that really becomes very specific ways of dealing with each of the profiles, and whenever someone has escalated. So, for example, one of the techniques that we discuss in the book that strongly recommend is the voice technique. So, here in Texas, where Matthew McConaughey is very, very popular, the attorneys in town call it my Matthew McConaughey voice. And when in conflict, I use the all right, talk low, talk slow, with psychologically people not being able to hold a higher tone of volume if they feel connected with you. And so one of the things we recommend with all 5 of the styles is in a conflict setting to start to bring your voice down, make that solid eye contact, and start to get people to match. And what's on the fun side of things, you can see people start to mimic your accent. So one of my favorite things to do, because I'm weird, is get people to talk in different tones of voice and things, whether it's customer service, and we recommend that in our trainings. But getting people to start to slow that cadence, start to talk in a lower tone of voice, will start to bring those emotions down. One of the other biggest ones, and full disclosure, I've been married for 12 years, been together with my wife for 15 years. She's the best. I went to play ball at a school with a 5-to-1 girl to guy ratio, which is the only reason I got her to marry me, because there wasn't really anybody else. But I hid this technique from her forever until I put it in this dang book, and now people know. But we call it the detour technique. So one of the things we see when we're not dealing with someone that's rational, or we're dealing with someone with high emotion, is they're very upset about multiple different issues. And one of the things we discuss is how to get to the core issue, but people are never just upset about one thing. There's always multiple things. And so one of the things strongly recommend is, as you've identified those issues and somebody is just going off, or that emotion spiked, reason is lowered, is to ask calmly a clarifying question using the voice technique about a separate issue, something that they brought up. So we're not interrupting them in terms of interrupting them and asking something completely different. It is an issue, and it is a hot button issue, but they have to stop, think about it, and redirect towards that issue. naturally that emotion is going to start to lower, and it's going to take a while for them to build back up that emotion on this issue. And once that happens, you're detour to the next one, and bounce and forth and back and forth. And so if we do that in a way that's respectful, if we do that we're connecting with them and we're coming across as, hey, we're really asking for their opinion about an issue that they brought up, that's going to start to lower that emotion as it goes through. But now, unfortunately, my wife knows the technique, so she knows if I'm doing that to her or not.
Can you give us maybe a little fun example of you using it with your wife? Because that detour technique is a little complicated, I think, to just hear first and not understand the nuances.
For example, if my wife is upset at me for not talking to her and planning a trip with the in-laws or with my family, but she's also upset at me for forgetting to take out the trash or for a purchase or something along those lines, and she's told me those three things, I know the family trip is the one that's the hot button issue. As she's getting worked up and as she's getting upset and talking to me about that, I'll ask calmly a clarifying question about the trash or about the purchase that I did. And so she has to stop, think about it, redirect. And while she still may be mad at me about the trash or about the purchase, it's going to take a while for that emotion to raise back up. And I can bounce back and forth between the three things that she's mad at me until that emotion is lowered to the point to where I'm a little bit off the hook.
So recognizing that those two techniques really rely on lowering the other person's emotion in conflict, oftentimes that emotion from the other person can spike our own emotion and make it difficult for us to even find techniques in our repertoire. So in those situations where your now emotional state is being so influenced by the other person's emotional state, how do we start to calm ourselves to find the strategies that you just employed?
First steps is identifying which type of conflict it is. So we talk a lot about the 5 styles, but so much of that depends on the 3 levels of conflict. Is this a task conflict about getting things done? Is it about, I need to do these 14 things on my list, and either that person is preventing me from doing those things or some outside factors doing it, and that's what this conflict's about. Is it process conflict? Is it about how things get done? Where, okay, sure, we'll get the tasks done when we need to get them done, but this is about how things are going, how this is implemented. Or is this a relational conflict? Is this what we all call drama and we all experience, but is this just conflict with another person because of what they've done or what their personality is? Identifying and knowing yourself which one of those triggers you. They're all frustrating and they're all annoying, but identifying which of those 3 personally make your emotions spike and make those arise. If we know that first going into it, and we can identify that, okay, I know I'm going to be task triggered here because this is about getting these specific things done. Labeling that is going to help keep our emotions in check. The other biggest thing strongly recommend in conflict is we all have a tendency to be, when triggered or when that emotion's high, is to be competitors and to immediately want to go solve it. A timeout helps immensely. So one of the techniques we strongly recommend that I wish I followed a little bit more is the email draft technique. So when you're triggered and you can feel it and you know it, or that person or that situation is going to make my emotion spike, typing up an email response, let it sit for 30 minutes or more. Go do some form of exercise, go walk, go work out, go do anything that's not send that email. Come back, reread it, and send it. So I had one of my trainings from years ago. I worked with a group of administrators and high school football coaches and things, and had a head coach. He was forced to come to the training for continuing education and showed up 30 minutes late, sat in the back, scrolled on his phone, and just didn't look at anything, didn't interact and engage. I told him about the email draft technique. He didn't say anything. He came back. We had a follow-up training 3 months later at the end of the semester. And he came in 30 minutes late again. And he said, "Hey, can I say something first?" I was like, yes, sir. Absolutely. He goes, this shit actually works. He was like, don't know if I can say that. Sorry. He said, I had a mom. She emailed me and said, my daughter's getting bullied by the coach and not enough playing time and yada, yada, yada. He was like, I typed up. He said, I know I'm a competitor. He said, I typed up a nasty email back, paused it, went and walked around my house and came in and said, I'm being a competitor. I need to be a collaborator on this one, and resolved it. So I said, let's go. So best quote ever.
So creating that space, obviously, and typing it forces you to think through all the different dynamics that are going on there. And I know Johnny and I have even gone a step further and then said, hey, can you take a look at this for me? Completely third party to the conflict that's going on, to kind of get that extra perspective that when our emotions are running and we're going to our default conflict style, we might have some blind spots going on around a conflict that could make it a lot easier to resolve if we actually knew what was going on in that blind spot.
100%. And I think that's the same goal of assessing the styles too, is, I say it all the time in trainings and speaking and things, is that, it's fun. It's fun to know what your style is and kumbaya and to better yourself. And okay, I'm an avoider and I need to be better at this in certain situations. But really, for predicting and preventing conflict, assessing what the other person's style is and then knowing what style I need to change to match it, it's going to be a best teammate is infinitely more important. And so taking that time, as you said, to assess not only, okay, I'm triggered, I'm triggered by this type of conflict. I need to take that time out, but it gives you the time to assess the other person and see what techniques, what style is going to match with them.
That 30 minutes also gives you that space of coming back to it. I think when it comes to conflict and trying to work it out, usually there's some personal feelings that are hurt as well. And you may have your eye on the task or process. Perhaps, somebody doing something in a way where that personally interferes and you take that personally. When you read that email again, you might see yourself trying to deal with that task, but also how your ego sneaks in a few barbs just to get your personal revenge, which is not needed, and it's only going to exacerbate the whole problem as well.
That is a great point. 100%. So it pours gas on the fire.
And even sometimes it's just enough where you're like, will they read this one sentence and take the hit that I want them to hit? And then when you're reading it that way, you're like, well, why do I even want that if what we're doing here is trying to get to a resolution?
So looking at the self-awareness piece, because it does seem so important for you to recognize your own style before putting all of this focus and effort on the other person, what are some practical ways that we could increase our self-awareness in this area, especially for those in the audience who are looking to move into leadership roles or in leadership roles and recognizing that conflict is almost a daily occurrence now?
I think your last point is absolutely huge, that it is a daily occurrence. People just don't always call it conflict. I mean, I remember meeting with different CEOs or superintendents or coaches or things that would say, well, we don't have conflict. And say, okay, cool. Well, tell me about your day. Well, all I do is put out fires. That's all I do. So whether you call it conflict or putting out fires or drama or whatever it is, it really is a daily occurrence. And so, one of the biggest first steps that recommend is once you know your style. So if you know, hey, I am a collaborator, identify which is the opposite style, which is the one that doesn't pair the best with collaborators. Well, avoiders don't. That is cross-match, clash, does not work well together. And it's going to be the opposite of counterintuitive for me. That's not my default. It is very hard for me to be an avoider. One of the first steps we recommend is try practicing that technique. In situations, as you see a smaller conflict come up, having that, as you mentioned, self-awareness to say, okay, this is one where I can be an avoider here. I need to let this conflict go and really start to practice it. And I think the second biggest one, and that's is really one of the goals of this book, and your first question of why writing it or getting into it is, we do these trainings and do these seminars and speeches and things, and people would come up and after, and it was never, so I've got this boss. It's, hey, this is great. I've got this mother-in-law. I've got this cousin, my roommate, my this. It's all, as you mentioned, personal conflict, which, as you mentioned, that hits home, that hits more. And so trying to implement another style, but see if you can do it at home or with your friends or with your relationships, because the emotion's just always going to be higher there. And if you can do it there, it's going to be much easier to transfer that over to work.
So would you say that the task or process style or type of conflict is a little bit less than the relational, which carries a lot more baggage and weight? And sometimes it's familial relations, which, have even more baggage and weight behind them.
You're always going to have that relational conflict trigger with friends, with families, and in the personal relationships that we have. And that's not going to go away. The conflict may be a process conflict, and it may be small. It may be, so-and-so roommate always chooses, where to go to dinner, or in a relationship that, things get done a specific way, and nitpicking and, hey, have you done this yet? Have you called this yet? Have you done this yet? Have you done this yet? But it hits different because it is going to have that relational conflict opponent. And as you mentioned, that's where the ego comes in. That's where the, wanting to get in those barbs and kind of trigger people as well come into play.
Okay, so we've recognized our style, and you gave one great example, the avoider and the collaborator are their opposites. What are the other examples of opposites now that we're starting to recognize our own style that we can adopt and employ in these situations?
One of the biggest ones is going to be an analyzer and an accommodator as well, because analyzers, they're going to want to get as much audience participation as possible. They're going to want to know all the information. They're going to do those things and really know what people are feeling or thinking. They're going to be very rational thinkers as well, even when they're triggered. That's going to be their default. Whereas accommodators, they don't want to interact. They don't want to have confrontation. They'd much rather, hey, I'm fine. And that's going to trigger the analyzers because they want that engagement. They want that interaction. They want that information. And that's also going to, I think the academic term is piss off an accommodator as well, because just leave me alone. Just leave me alone and let me do that. The competitors are going to be a little bit trickier. So a competitor, you naturally would think that they would be very frustrated with an avoider, just because competitors want to resolve things now, whereas avoiders will let it sit. But what we find in high emotion conflict is that once an avoider is triggered, and once they have reached the point where they feel like this is something they need to resolve, they're going to handle it almost exactly like a competitor. They want to sit down. They want to get it done because they want it off their plate. They want to go back to doing the things that they want to do. So typically for a competitor, they're going to clash with collaborators, and they're going to clash with accommodators as well for very different reasons. Collaborators, they want the small talk. They want to engage. They want to read people. They want to know exactly what's going on. And that can absolutely drive a competitor crazy at first. But once that emotion's lowered, they typically work pretty well together. Whereas accommodators, they're just not going to engage with that competitor. And if so, they're going to get steamrolled. And that's where we see that bitterness and wait till it kind of escalates.
It's super helpful to recognize these patterns. And I'd love to talk about the conflict agenda, what it is, and then what are the skills that will make us adept at employing some of the strategies and techniques that we're really excited to dig into in the back half of the episode.
And y'all are the best. I love talking about this stuff. So this is my
we can tell
one of my favorite things to do. So on the conflict agenda, the first step being, as we talked about, assessment, identifying your own style, identifying the style of the people that are either in conflict, if we're third party coming in to resolve it, almost mediation style, or if it's direct conflict between you and them. But also taking it a step further and assessing the type of conflict. Is it that task? Is it that process? Is it that relational? Or are we dealing with relational, but the underlying is kind of in that process? So that's the first step. That's the step that gets skipped so often, and people jump to the final component. The next big step on the timeline is identifying that core issue. So there's if y'all ever find a conflict that only has one issue, please let me know. I'd love to publish a paper on it or write another book about it. I've never seen it. People always come up with, even if they make them up, issues to justify their position or what they do. And we learned that at a very young age. So my oldest daughter, Blair, she's 8 now, but back when she was 2, she figured out she could get away with just about anything by saying, "But Daddy, I'm scared." I'm like, "Oh, baby, don't be scared. Daddy's here and he'll take care of all of it for you." And she got away with that for 6 months until finally she said it about wearing pants. And I was like, dang, I just got mediated. But we all come up with these issues to justify the position that we did, the position that we take, whether that's in a conflict setting or our actions. We're always going to have those smokescreen issues in there that are going to sound better. And so identifying what is that core issue, what's at the heart of the conflict, that's going to help us in the long run, save a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of energy. So we don't waste time. Trying to resolve stuff that doesn't really matter.
I think it's just a natural response to start thinking about how do I not make this my fault, right? How do I soften any problems or anything that I've created? How do I soften it? How do I get out of it? That's just natural. I think that's just self-preservation. However, if you find yourself in that thinking, to stop yourself and realize that you're not focused on the problem and how to handle the problem and how to address the problem so that everyone can work on it together, you're trying to save your ass. And if that's the case, you're putting fuel on the fire. I certainly do it. And then when I'm sitting there going, when I catch myself in that mode, I'm like, well, here I am defending myself. That doesn't help this problem. Let's get back to that issue. I think it's easier for people to realize that's just something naturally you're going to do. And when you catch yourself, cut it out.
Well, those smoke screens, I feel they're always present. So are there some ways for us to figure out what's the real issue from the smoke screen, especially from a skilled mediator like yourself? Because I know even when we went through these major conflicts in business that you come with a lot of different things and the mediators really adept at like getting to that core issue quickly. So we're not spending all day batting back and forth the issues that are the smoke screens. That
brings to one of my favorite techniques. So in this stage, identifying the underlying interest and, really developing that agenda for resolving the conflict, first steps, identifying all of the issues. So every single one that's been said. And that's going to do two things for us. One, it's going to help validate the other person. So just, as you mentioned, that's huge, kind of taking that ego out of it and listening to what they say and really making sure we have an understanding. That'll help, eliminate miscommunications, but also it's going to validate them that, hey, I get my chance to vent, I get my chance to talk, I get my chance to tell my side of the story. And as we're asking them questions, clarifying, okay, this issue here, this issue here, this issue here, that's going to kind of set that stage, building the rapport with them in order to do that. So once those issues are identified, this is where the detour technique comes into play so much. So that whole concept of assessing people, but we're not just assessing their style, we're also assessing their baseline of behavior. What is their tone? How do they communicate? Their body language, their voice, all of these things as we're talking to them and we're reading and we're identifying, okay, this is their baseline of, this is how AJ sits, this is how he talks, these are his inflections. As we use that detour technique to go through the different issues that they've brought up, we can see what changes, what starts to bring out more emotion, what starts to make that change in voice happen, what starts to get people to fidget or do all of these different things. It won't tell us exactly why that issue is the most important, or why the emotion is spiking, but it definitely gives us a clue that, okay, this is what we need to go dig into and ask more questions.
So that detour technique is really assessing like the deep underlying trigger of all of this. And that will be observable with active listening and really paying close attention to vocal tonality and body language as you're sharing back the issues as you've heard them.
And being able to navigate and bounce from issue to issue without making things worse by them thinking that you're interrupting them or not paying attention, that, hey, we're clarifying, hey, do you mind if I, just to make sure I understand about this, where you're coming from on this. Having people stop, redirect, and think, it's going to lower that emotion, but also it's going to give us the chance to observe how do they handle what changes between this issue and this issue. And seeing that emotional response, that's going to help us kind of clue in on, okay, there's something about this issue here. There's something, it's not about the trash. It's not about the vacation. There's something else going on here with this. And this is where we need to deep dive more.
That's a great example of the person deep down just not feeling heard in all of these different situations, where it might be the trash, it might be the planning without them, it might be involving the in-laws and not actually hearing what they wanted to do on that vacation or what was really important to them. So we're getting down to the much deeper issue at play here. We recognize that. We know their style. So let's walk through some of these techniques now to actually resolve the conflict.
People typically in the trainings and things, the biggest pushback is, well, I don't have time to do all of that. I'm busy, or busy at home, or I've got kids, or I run, all of these things. But what that does, if we do get to the heart of the issue and resolve it, it eliminates the frequent flyers. So you may be able to resolve the surface level issues and feel good about that and get that off your plate. But people are just going to keep coming back. So my wife was a night shift ER nurse forever. And so people would come in over and over and over using it as their primary care doctor, but they weren't there for what they said they were there for. They wanted either work excuse or pain meds or different things. And with that not being resolved, they were going to keep coming up with more issues to come back. So it's usually one of the biggest disclaimers we're going to put in at this stage of the process is everybody wants to jump and use the techniques to just resolve it and get it done. But if we do that, we'll spin our wheels and not if we don't know the core issue that we're dealing with. So the biggest, the final stage, that's leading people to a solution. So I don't, or either of y'all cook or cook well. Okay, awesome. So that's the biggest thing is our goal is to get people to cook the meal themselves, because then if they don't like the meal, nobody to really blame but themselves, and psychologically they feel more comfortable because they had the buy-in in creating it. So these techniques, they can be used assessing people and venting and going through these first stages in the process. By that point, you've lowered emotion enough that you can make firm suggestions on this is what we should do. And that will probably work. But our goal is to really resolve conflict, is to help people come to that solution themselves or to suggest it. And so one of the biggest techniques that I always use and recommend for work setting is always have a whiteboard. And I call it the whiteboard techniques. We don't have to actually have a whiteboard and use it, but mentally we can do it. So for example, I had a nasty divorce mediation years and years ago where the husband and wife, they had, just for the sake of math, let's say they had $100,000 in joint assets. That's it. But they owed over $200,000 worth of debt. So completely upside down. They were threatening to go to court for, let's say, $50,000 a piece. And they were paying me a bunch of money to sit here and argue about it. And they just were going off on this was spent because of his affair and her affair and all of these things. And so, had to lower emotion, identify the core issues, all of those things, but getting to that final stage of making it their idea. So once the emotion was lowered, I mirrored out and said, hey, do you mind just real quick? How much was on that credit card? You got in this bank account? Okay, so y'all have $100,000 worth of positive assets. Oh, okay, and then you owe about $200,000 worth of debt. And then, Mr. Attorney, how much are your fees? Oh, wow. Okay, it's gonna cost about $50,000. Okay, great. Thanks, guys. I just wanted to make sure I clarified that and had the numbers right. And the husband looked at it and he said, well, shit, why don't we just, take the money, pay off half the debt and split it? And the wife goes, yeah, Jim, why don't we do that? I was like, I think that's a brilliant idea. I think that's a wonderful idea. That's amazing. It's an idea that any of us would have come up with right out of the gate. Everybody but that couple in conflict could see it, that is the best solution. That would save tons of money. A judge would order this anyway, but asking them those questions to lead them to a solution is the ultimate goal. So for us in this stage, once we know the core issue and we have a plan and we want to lead, the first thing we have to do is identify whether to use the momentum technique or use the domino technique. So as we talked about before, there's never just one issue. There's going to be a lot of smoke screens. For some profiles, for some of the styles, you're going to want to get to the heart of the issue right away. You're not going to want to mess around with the surface level issues with those smoke screens. You're going to want to go directly for the big one. And that's why we call it the domino technique. Once you knock that out, the rest of them are just going to fall down and go away. Whereas some styles, it's going to be the exact opposite. If we go directly in and immediately try and resolve the core issue, they're going to get triggered. That emotion is going to come back and we're not going to make much progress. Instead, we want to do the momentum technique. We want to get a couple quick wins, working on the conflicts that don't matter as much, those issues, to lead up to that big one.
Okay, so can you help us map between the two then? So what styles definitely do we want to go domino with?
Definitely, without a doubt, the first one is the competitor. If you use momentum with a competitor, it will not go well. It will not go well. Do not recommend it unless you just really want to incite some emotion within people and sit back and watch. The other is the avoider as well. So if they've decided, they've done the opportunity costs and weighed and realized, okay, this is a conflict I need to deal with, they don't want to mess around with smokescreen issues. They want to get to the heart of it. They want to resolve it, and they want to be done. For your collaborators, your analyzers, and your accommodators, we want to use the momentum technique, but for very different reasons. For the analyzer, they're trying to get as much information as possible. They want to know every piece. They don't want to be rushed. And for them, they feel like they're winning if they're resolving these small conflicts and feel ready and able to attack the big one. For the collaborators, it's the opposite. They love people. They love getting information. They love resolving each little conflict. They're going to feel cheated if they only resolve the big conflict. Whereas the final ones, the accommodators, they need to feel comfortable first, that this is not going to be an intense confrontation, that they are comfortable with resolving some of these smaller ones before they get to more of a hot button issue.
Let's start with the domino and maybe walk us through an example of that technique employed.
Let's say work example, and this is something we've actually had in trainings and things as it comes up, that they're arguing about setting vacation policy, arguing about spending budgets, in terms of approving an updated marketing or travel budget side of things, and arguing about a new policy for lunch breaks. So those three, some people they would matter more than to others, but the biggest one was the change in vacation policy. The other ones, not quite as big a deal. They could work out and kind of go through. They were more of the smoke screen type issues. So when it comes to the domino or dealing with, your avoider with your competitor, it's all right. We're setting that agenda. The first and our main focus is going to be on the vacation policy. What are the biggest issues? What are your thoughts? How can we resolve this? Putting that in their hands, and then being able to point to, guys, we did it. We knocked we knocked that out. Okay, what's next on the agenda? Okay, we need to talk about the marketing budget. We need to talk about the lunch break policy that we went through. If we're dealing with the collaborators, the analyzers, or the accommodators, the complete opposite. Let's start with the one that's not as big of an issue, the marketing budget. Hey, what are your thoughts? Take me through this. Let's go. And we're pointing out all along the way, over and over, look at how much progress you've made. Look at what all we've done. Look at what all we've accomplished. Wow, so we only have one more thing left, and that is the vacation policy.
So it's reorienting those based on the style as a way for us to satisfy the other person's wants and needs directly in that conflict.
Absolutely.
So as we're going through this, do you recommend that we're taking notes and starting to really piece things together? What's your approach, especially as a mediator where you're kind of sitting between two contentious parties? Walk us through what your notepad looks like as you're going through this.
Whether it's a mental notepad because it's with relationships or with friends or family, or it is, as you mentioned, a formal side of things. The first notepad is drawing out those issues. So just to reiterate that, identifying what are the 17 issues that are in this conflict. So I know what their style is. I know what style is going to match the best with them. I need to be a collaborator. I need to be a competitor here. And identifying here are the core issues and circling, whether mentally or literally, what I think the hot button issue is. The next is I'm ranking them. So, okay, I know the hot button issues here. These other 4 or 5 different things, these other 12 things, I'm ranking them in order to set up that momentum and domino technique. After that, it is okay. It's time to play ball. This is where we get to bring in the other fun techniques, the other things to do to start to eventually lead people to that solution. So,
how much interviewing are you doing beforehand on both sides to get all the information that you need to set up the strategy that you want, the issues that will be handled, and the solutions that you want to work towards?
In formal mediation, we don't do interviewing ahead of time just to prevent bias or anything like that. But for actually predicting and preventing conflict and resolving it as much as possible. So one of the first things we want to know, and we want to try and figure out if we can, even in personal things, is what are the ways people communicate? So kind of that mode of, do they prefer to communicate via text? Do they prefer to express their emotions on social media? Are they sending these long-winded emails? Are they always going in person? That's going to essentially, that's going to help us rule out certain profiles. It won't tell us exactly who we're dealing with right away, but it is going to be that first step in eliminating some. So for example, if people prefer to communicate, especially in a conflict setting, through email, probably going to be either our avoiders or our analyzers for very different reasons. One, it's very easy to avoid people when you're only communicating through email. You can have 90,000 unread emails. I send an email to you and you don't respond for a week. I think maybe he's on vacation. Maybe it bounced back, or maybe it went to spam. It's a little more awkward to whenever you text someone and they text you back, the 3 little bubbles pop up, and then it goes away and you don't hear from them for 3 days. So a little harder to avoid that scenario. And then the same for your analyzers, but for different reasons. They want to get as much information as possible. So they're going to want to ask all of these different questions. And it's awkward to get the junior high length breakup text, where it's novels of information, even with the new iPhone update where you can click and it expands. But in email, it's not quite as awkward. It's not quite as weird to ask very specific questions. we all have those people we work with or in our lives that'll send the emails with broken up into paragraphs and highlighted, bolded, and those things. And so that mode of communication is huge. Your collaborators are always going to want to be face to face or over the phone. So are your competitors. Competitors because they want to resolve it now. Collaborators because they want to read people. They want to gain as much information as small talk as well. And then for your accommodators, that's their worst nightmare. They're going to prefer that text messages, the social media, things they don't have to interact quite as much with it. So that mode is huge. And if we can find that out before, or if we know that from the people in our lives and relationships, that can help us kind of narrow down to specific profiles.
It's so helpful. I think so often we don't go in with the plan, and then we settle very quickly around the smokescreen issues and not the big issues. And then we get frustrated when we're right back in conflict with the same person or team again and again. So for those in leadership roles, does it help to build teams around conflict style? Are we looking to pair and group people together if we're leading a team and we got to get these big things done to facilitate resolving conflicts quickly on our teams?
Well, from what we've seen, companies use this for leaders. Using this is really two different areas. One is, as you mentioned, the building of the team. So whether that's deciding who to promote, who to be team leader, whether that's as you're interviewing people and saying, "Ooh, I've got a full team of avoiders. Do I really want to hire this collaborator? Is that going to go well? Or I have a lot of task trigger people. Do I really want the accommodator in here?" So we see people do that to kind of, or essentially to predict and prevent conflict from happening. The second is in assessing their own teams. I'd say the number one biggest thing I get brought in to do is to do assessment, to have the team take our assessment profile and say, yeah, these specific situations, those two people they're gonna fight, and it's just gonna keep happening. So we may either want to make some changes in terms of how we handle them, or we may just need to separate those people, or make sure that there's somebody there, or changing some policies ahead of time. So identifying with existing teams what's going to work and what's not, and start to see those fires before they happen is huge. But also in just the creation of the team itself, as I've got a lot of this profile. Do I really want to hire their worst teammate?
This has been such a fascinating conversation with great examples, and I know our audience loves analyzing themselves and getting to know their style. So where can they find out more about the self-analysis that you offer and the work that you do?
First is the book, How to Get Along with Anyone. It's coming out February 18th. But our website, theconflictdocs.com. So we have not only a way to purchase the book, but we also do have scientifically validated assessment that people can log on and take that will tell them what their profile is, what their type of conflict triggers them, as well as their best teammate and worst teammate. So we recommend it strongly before any first date. Just have your date, take the assessment, see if it's going to be a match.
This link.
Yeah, may save you some time and money on a bad date.
Yeah, we might start putting in our online dating profiles. I'm an accommodator.
There you go. I'm an accommodator. No competitors here.
Thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you.
Guys, thank you. Thank you so much. It was very nice to meet y'all.